Welcome to Chapter 9. As we will soon see, all modern mammal lineages evolved from ancestral mammals that resemble a modern-day shrew. And so in this lecture, that's exactly what we are going to be talking about. Thus we begin our journey into understanding human ancestors. As we begin this long journey to understand human origins and evolution, we have to start somewhere. So we could start about 13.7 billion years ago with the origins of the universe, or 4.6 billion years ago soon after the formation of the Earth. We could even fast forward to 500 million years ago with the appearance of the first vertebrates. But for the sake of our limited class time, we will begin our journey approximately 225 million years ago in a time period known as the Triassic. By the start of the Triassic period, land animals had evolved into a group of reptiles known as therapsids. These were not your typical reptiles, however. There is evidence that they were warm-blooded and they had fur covering their bodies. The middle image on this slide is of a therapsid known as Ch09. It was about a foot long. By the end of the Triassic period, around 190 million years ago, most therapsids had gone extinct, and almost all of the terrestrial niches were filled by dinosaurs. However, still surviving at the heels of the great dinosaurs were small mammals. The fossil record indicates that these early mammals were mouse-sized, came out at night, and lived on seeds and insects. They also laid eggs, like the platypus does today, though placental mammals also evolved during the reign of the dinosaurs. The dinosaur extinction occurred around 65 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous period. This massive extinction left niches unfilled, and it was the small mammals, like the shrew shown here, that quickly diversified and began to fill the niches once filled by dinosaurs. All the major groups of mammals, from whales and elephants to bats and primates, evolved from the survivors of the Great Extinction. How did this happen? Before we dive into the specific changes that have occurred in the last 65 million years, it's important for us to spend some time on the methods that scientists used to reconstruct the ancient Earth. While we won't spend a lot of time on all of them, we will talk about fossils. But keep in mind that, again, evolution is not about progress. If the environment never changed, then the selection pressures that led to the evolution of bipedalism or a large brain, for instance, may have never existed, and humans as we currently recognize them might not have evolved. So that's important to think about. Like in the past, climate change was not necessarily a bad thing. But there's evidence that the Earth has become drier and cooler over the last 20 million years. If this had not happened, our ancestors might still be living in trees. So one way in which the world has changed is that the continents have shifted. So if you look at this figure, at the very bottom, it's a little bit tiny, but that's the world today. And if you notice that the east coast of South America is a mirror image of the west coast of Africa, is this just a coincidence? It turns out that rocks and fossils found in South America have sister counterparts in Africa. They were once joined together. The continents are not fixed. Instead, they float on dense rock that comprises the ocean floor. Around 225 million years ago, just as the therapsids were evolving, all the continents were connected in a giant landmass known as Pangaea. So why does this matter? So first, oceans serve as a barrier to terrestrial animals, and so animals evolving on one continent can be reproductively isolated from others. And second, continental positions can alter ocean currents, which have an important impact on global temperature. As we'll see in a moment, data collected from deep sea cores demonstrates that the Earth has gotten considerably cooler over the course of the past 65 million years. So yeah, the world has become generally cooler. That is one change. And you can see too on the figure that the different eras show this general cooling and drying, which has led to a lot of variation in primate evolution and influence in primate evolution. So let's talk a moment about fossilization and the importance of this in terms of our class. So scientists who find and describe these ancient remains are known as paleontologists, as many of you probably already know that, and those working specifically with fossils of primates, apes, and humans are known as paleoanthropologists. These bones and teeth can tell us how our ancestors moved, how big they were, what they ate, and what their mating and social structure may have been. The plant and animal fossils found in the vicinity can be used to reconstruct the environment inhabited by our ancestors. However, circumstances have to be just right for a fossil to form and be found. The animal needs to have died in an environment conducive for mineralization, like a lake shore or cave. Next, it needs to be buried relatively quickly, so to avoid being scavenged. If it passes these milestones, the next step is for the rock that it entombed within to surface through erosion or tectonic activity. Finally, it needs to be noticed and discovered before it disintegrates. So likely of all these things happening is actually really rare, but which is why we have a lot of fossils, but not a whole lot. So comparatively. So the rarity of fossils leads to other problems of interpretation as well. So according to estimates made by Robert Martin at the Chicago Field Museum, only 3% of primate species that have existed in the past 65 million years have been discovered by paleontologists. We have very many fossils still to find. Working with the ones we have found, however, may lead to erroneous conclusions about how the different primates are related to one another and when they last shared a common ancestor. So we've covered how paleontologists can reconstruct ancient environments and how, we've talked a bit about fossils. But how do they know when they found a primate? Most of the time fossils are not complete, but instead consist of fragmentary bits of teeth and bones. So how do paleontologists know what they found is actually a primate? In fact, they use the characteristics of a primate. So they may look at grasping hands and feet, nails instead of claws, forward-facing eyes on the brain case, hind limb-dominated locomotion, a relatively large brain to body size, and the teeth formula also is very important. With all this being said, they've used these traits to look at really early mammals to determine if they were primates or not. So the earliest fossils that give us some clues as to what primates looked like are called plesiadapiforms. These animals lived 54 to 65 million years ago in what is today Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, and Colorado. Remember, though, that the Earth was much warmer in the Paleocene, and there's evidence that a lush forest occupied this area of time when the plesiadapiforms existed. There are many different kinds of these animals, ranging in size from a shrew to a cat. Researchers disagree about whether or not they were actually primates or extinct cousins of primates. Regardless, they do have a lot of traits to consider them to be primates. By the Eocene, which was 34 to 54 million years ago, according to fossils found by paleontologists, there unquestionably were primates. These animals had forward-facing eyes surrounded by a post-orbital bar, short snouts, relatively large brains, nails instead of claws, hind limb-dominated locomotion, and grasping hands and feet. During the Eocene, the planet continued to warm, and both the temperature and increased moisture in the air promoted the spread of tropical rainforests throughout Europe and North America. Eocene primate fossils are found throughout North America, Eurasia, and North Africa, as shown in this map, and are quite plentiful with over 200 named species of primate from the Eocene. These primates were classified in two large groups, both adapids and omamids, which you should read about that more in depth in your book. Moving forward, by the early Miocene, apes and catarrhines diverged from a common catarrhine ancestor. While monkeys were relatively rare in the early part of the Miocene and increased in number by the end of the Miocene, apes show the opposite trend. They were initially very plentiful and then slowly began to dwindle in number. That dwindling continues today as the gray apes are some of the more endangered animals in the world. The early Miocene experienced an increase in global temperature and in rainfall. Tropical rainforests expanded throughout Africa and even into Europe and Asia. As the Miocene progressed, however, the globe became cooler and more arid. Forests became patchier and they were replaced by open woodlands and grasslands. By the end of the Miocene, the great north-south mountain ranges of Africa had formed, creating a rain shadow to the west that nourished a thick rainforest, while the lands to the east became savanna. These shifts were critical for both the origin and diversification of the apes, and also for the evolution of our branch. So anyway, all these, that's when we start to see just more evidence of ape diversification during the Miocene. And so this basically summarizes just some early primate evolution. Be sure to get the details from the book, and that wraps up Chapter 9.